our next guest I'd like to introduce. Now, before I do, I just want to say the Cornish language, once endangered, has seen somewhat of a comeback in recent years. And our next guest, Jowdy Davey, Cornish language lead at Cornwall Council, is a fluent Cornish speaker and will share with us the potential of fostering a sense of belonging and cultural continuity with revitalisation of the language. Welcome, Jowdy.
Thank you. Wel, just da, Jowdy o fi, a dy wrth Consul Cerno, hag Thesel fi and Brinkius and Yeth Cynuic. I'm Jowdy from Cornwall Council and I'm the Cornish language lead. It's a real pleasure to be here and thank you for the invitation to speak. So many interesting languages on the schedule today, so lovely to contribute Cornish to that. So I'm just going to talk about Cornwall's Cornish language strategy and what we're doing to help preserve and to promote the language. So just a bit of a context, and it's useful there to be following the Welsh, actually. So Cornish is one of the 6 Celtic languages, closely related to Breton and Welsh, but also part of that family that includes Scottish Gaelic, Irish, Manx. And Middle Cornish really flourished from around 1200 to 1600, when some of you may know about the medieval miracle plays that were written around that time, and when Cornish was the main language of Cornwall. And then late Cornish really came about from about 1600 onwards, and the language was pushed westwards. And the last speakers of Cornish are thought to have been around about the 1890s, where it was a kind of a language used by the community rather than being seen on signage and in place names. But a community revival throughout the 20th century has kept the language just about alive. Today there are about 500 to 1,000 speakers, although as I'm sure those of you who know about this sort of thing, it's very difficult to guess how many speakers there are in these kind of circumstances. So for example, we've got over 5,000 people who's downloaded some of the online learning apps. So yeah, but about 500 to 1,000 speakers and fluent speakers. So just an example here between Breton, Cornish and Welsh, those 3 words there, glas, meaning blue, and I believe it's the same in Welsh, someone can tell me in a minute. And in Cornish, where glas is a word for a kind of natural colour of blue or green, so the colour of the sea, whereas we have gwyrth, which means kind of unnatural colour, green. So the situation for Cornish. So Cornish is an endangered language and it's still vulnerable because it has a small number of speakers and the number of speakers are scattered and there are very few mother tongue speakers. But it is stronger than other languages because it has official recognition, which I'll come on to in a moment. There's plenty of literature in the Cornish language. We have the Cornish dictionary, grammar books, teaching resources. Gets used online. Again, I'll come on to that a bit more in a moment. The age profile is skewed towards the older generation, but there are younger speakers coming through. Social attitudes generally, I think, to linguistic diversity in the UK and hopefully across the world are kind of changing. Technology is having a really big impact on the use of Cornish and, of course, in its cultural use and particularly popular culture. We're beginning to see it more. So if we look at the timeline here, so in 2002, the UK government recognised the Cornish language under the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. And so a Cornish language office was set up at that moment in 2002. In 2014, the government recognised the Cornish as a national minority under the European Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. And so this affords the Cornish the same status as, for example, the Scots, the Welsh and the Irish. And being recognised as a national minority means the Cornish have the right to express, preserve, share and develop their distinct culture and identity. And that includes the Cornish language. And so in 2015, the UK government gave responsibility for obligations under these treaties to Cornwall Council. So this infographic here, what you can see is the relationship between the Council of Europe, the UK government and Cornwall Council. So the Cornish Language Office sits within the culture team, which is part of the neighbourhoods department alongside teams like libraries, leisure, registration, and the culture team report to the National Minority Working Group, which was set up by Cornwall Council. So here you can see we're almost at the end actually of our current 10-year strategy. So it's an interesting time for me to join the department. I only joined a year ago. So we are now building up to what the next 10 years looks like. I'm particularly interested to hear about later in the afternoon around technology and particularly AI and what impact that's going to have over the next 10 years. But in the case of where we are at the moment. So there are 4 sections to the Cornish language strategy: acquisition planning, so education essentially, status planning, so it's civic use, status and profile raising, language use planning, so use of the language within the community, and then corpus planning, so things like the Cornish dictionary and vocabulary. So the council is responsible for the Go Cornish programme in local primary schools, and there are currently 50 primary schools set up using the system or taking part in it, and that represents around 9,000 pupils. So this isn't teaching sort of generally subjects through the medium of Cornish, but it's making sure that Cornish is used. For example, they do the registration in the morning in Cornish, or they might use phrases throughout the day, and that the language is very visible through the school, so they have signage, etc., in Cornish as well. And actually, we're full at the moment, so there is a waiting list for schools to join. It's that popular at the moment, and there's only one part-time person actually delivering as well. So that's something we're looking at the moment. There's currently no secondary course or actually any formally recognised Cornish language accredited qualification, which is again something as children go through primary school are keen to move on to. So that's good. There's demand. We also have a series of adult classes, and actually, interestingly, over half of which are now online. So that's showing the real impact of COVID and everybody moving online, being more comfortable with online classes. And again, I think we heard earlier from Kaylee, a lot of that actually being international. So people all over the world suddenly finding that they can learn Cornish online, or maybe at funny times of day, but it's made it really accessible. And again, I mentioned earlier the Memorise and IndieLan app, so more people again are learning online and learning in different ways. And we've had over 5,000 people download the IndieLan app. So yeah, technology is really playing its part in making it more accessible. So moving on to the status planning. So this is really around increasing civic use of Cornish, and particularly at the council, but also generally at a kind of UK government level. So we provide a translation service that's largely for kind of street signs, but it's also used personally for poems that people might want at their wedding or naming their house. It's very popular for that. Most council offices now have bilingual signage, and there's bilingual signage on things like the Park and Ride bus service, on recycling trucks. You see it on a kind of daily basis. It's becoming quite normalised. And again, the use of the language on civic occasions. So, for example, there was a bilingual Cornish-English proclamation of the Ascension of King Charles in Truro. Cornish MPs here we can see giving their oaths in the Cornish language. So it's really beginning to gain profile. And currently we have Part 2 status under the European Charter. We're working towards moving that to Part 3 alongside other British Isles Indigenous languages. So language use, which I think is the most important and most interesting, which is used within the community. So we have various Cornish language newsletters, magazines. We have a YouTube channel, a Cornish language radio station. There are community events. So again, with many endangered languages, it's difficult to be immersed in them. So we have to create our own opportunities to come together and talk. So it's called a Yethan, often in pubs. There's the Ordinalia, which is the medieval miracle play, which is done every 5 years in Cornwall. And there's a lot of Cornish language included in that as well. It's some of the oldest examples of stage directions in the world, many of which are in the Cornish language. And then Cornish is appearing more in popular culture and in the media. So here's a great image of a short film called Cestaf, which is available on BBC iPlayer. And there are now 4 Cornish language shorts on BBC iPlayer, which you can download or can have a look at. I encourage you to do so because it helps with our numbers as well, but that's becoming much more accessible. There are BAFTA award-winning films like Ynys Main, which includes the Cornish language. For example, Mercury Award nominee Gwenno, who sings in the Cornish language and also in Welsh, which is really helping to gain that profile. Cornwall Council are also supporting an organisation called Endelienta, which is encouraging more singers to use and kind of play with the Cornish language, and that's having a real knock-on effect. And we're seeing musicians come through with much more confidence singing and using the Cornish language in a creative way. And then moving on to the business community. So we're starting to see Cornish a lot more as a way of businesses to really differentiate themselves in competitive markets. So whether that's simply at the pub where we're saying Dydd Da, hello, whether it's the names of companies, quite often it's associated with food and drinks as well, the food and drink sector. So Corev there, Corev meaning beer in Cornish. And at the bottom left there is a great image from an ice cream company that did an entire advert in Cornish, and that got them a lot of publicity. Of course, underpinning all of this really is the corpus part of the strategy. So this is around offering the translation service, which is so important, underpinning this, and support with pronunciation, people that we're sending out to film sets to support actors, for example, and the Academy, which looks after the Cornish language dictionary and place naming as well. So as you can see here, we have nearly 100,000 searches on the dictionary, high numbers again in the corpus section, and place names, so 227 last year, and that continues to grow. And so as we grow the quantity and importantly the quality, and the Academy here helps to ensure there's a real robust kind of quality check on this. Say we have the data that we can be using to keep up with advances in technology and with AI, and the better the quality and the more data we have, the more we're able to kind of tap into those technologies to support further access to the language. And so I often get kind of asked what's the most important part of all of these, and I think the answer is there's no one really. I think you can have the finest exam system and teaching system in the world, but if you've got no books to read or nowhere to go where you can use that language again, and once you've finished your exams, then what's the point? It sort of gets lost, you know. And again, if you've got working with people, they need a dictionary to work from, and that needs to be robust, and that needs to have a quality check. So I think, you know, really we're just working on everything all of the time, and kind of keeping that energy going. So I've really whizzed through that, but I hope that's a short introduction there to the work that we're doing.
No, thank you so much. That was totally understandable. It didn't occur to me as whizzing. That really landed. I'm really grateful to you. I have a question for you. Do you envisage the revitalization of the Cornish language impacting regional economic development, tourism and cultural tourism in particular? You mentioned trade and branding, so I was just wondering how that may lend into tourism.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I think it always has, but I think people are really kind of picking up on it, and I picked on it just now, and that kind of differentiating yourself in challenging markets and competitive markets. Often what's kind of described as the gateway drug, if you like, into Cornish is the road sign. So you drive into Cornwall and suddenly they all look quite different, and people are, oh, that's curious. Why is it called that? Or why is it, you know, and that's how people get sucked into learning about the language. It's how I did. It's how many of us did. And so actually just driving around Cornwall as a tourist, you know, there's that side to it. And I think that's where certainly from a cultural tourism perspective, people are picking up on that and using that as a unique identifier.
Yeah, and we'll have another question very quickly. It's from Richard Walter, one of our attendees. He's in the audience, and he actually posed this question to Kaylee, but you can answer this too. He says, as a Swiss person, we have a national language, and I hope I pronounce this right, Richard, Romansh, and it's in possible danger of going extinct soon. There's only around 50,000 speakers left. He's asking, what can the average person do to take, what actions can an average person take to help prevent the language from dying out?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo exactly what Kaylee was saying, really. You know, we have a saying, Coast Canuic jog, which is slightly different, speak Cornish badly, and that's not really what we mean, but what we mean is just use what you have and use it confidently. There's no wrong way of saying Cornish. The only wrong way is not saying nothing at all, is what we say. So simply, if it's just say, you know, hello, good morning, mitenda, you know, that kind of thing, is just getting it normalized, getting used to just saying it and people hearing it. You know, I think it's this sort of circle, isn't it? If it's not visible, then you don't think about it, and it's just that constant visibility. And I think certainly I found, I said I've only been in the post for a year, but song is such a powerful way. And again, echoing the Welsh there, who were famous for their singing, but song is such a great way of becoming fluent very quickly and to feel fluent very quickly, and just a fun way of engaging. And so I'd say, yeah, sing and say welcome and use what you've got, and I think again that, there are occasions where you're saying cheers or you're saying happy birthday, there's always ways to slip the language in there. You don't all have to be completely fluent.
Yeah, I mean, as I said to Kaylee, it's all about having a go and not worrying about getting it right, but just being a contribution, getting involved. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your contribution.